Don't be home when we get back. Once it's old, it's dead to me. Julian texted this from Santorini, posing with his mistress while my family smiled behind them. All funded by my credit card. He was right. Dead things should be buried. So I called my crew. Instead of demolishing our $4 million glass mansion, I decided to bury it. They will return to find a green hill covering their luxury under 5,000 tons of concrete. Welcome home. Julian. My name is Evelyn Graymont, and I was standing knee-deep in cold, gray sludge when I realized my marriage was not just over, but that it had been an expensive, decade-long lie. The rain in Seattle does not fall like it does in other places. It does not sprinkle or mist. It drives hard, relentless and punishing, turning the ground into a treacherous soup of clay and silt. I wiped a mixture of mud and water from my safety goggles, blinking against the sting as I surveyed the retaining wall my crew was struggling to stabilize. We were 3 weeks behind schedule on the cliffside preservation project in Magnolia. The earth here was unstable, prone to sliding into the sound if you looked at it wrong. And it was my job as CEO of Apex Terraforming and Landscape to make sure gravity did not win. I was shouting orders over the roar of the excavators, pointing toward the secondary drainage line, when my phone began to buzz against my chest. It was a persistent, angry vibration inside the waterproof pocket of my high-visibility jacket. I ignored it for the first 2 minutes. I was busy saving a $20 million property from sliding into the ocean, but the buzzing did not stop. It was a rhythmic, demanding pulse that cut through the noise of the heavy machinery and the pounding rain. I signaled for Mike, my foreman, to take over the line. He nodded, his face grim under his hard hat, and I stepped back toward the relative shelter of the site trailer's awning. My hands were gloved and caked in mud, so I had to peel the right glove off with my teeth before I could fish the phone out. The screen was wet, reacting sluggishly to my touch. I expected a crisis from the finance department or a permit issue with the city. Instead, I saw a barrage of notifications from a group chat titled Family Healing Retreat. My stomach tightened, but not with suspicion. Not yet. My mother, Beatrice, and my younger brother, Caleb, were supposed to be at a holistic wellness center in Sedona, Arizona. I had paid for the entire 2-week stay, $6,000 per person for yoga, meditation, and what the brochure called familial bonding therapy. My husband, Julian, had driven them to the airport 3 days ago, claiming he was going on a solo camping trip in the Cascades to find his creative center again. I tapped the green icon. The chat opened, and the gray rain of Seattle vanished, replaced instantly by the blinding high-definition azure of the Aegean Sea. It was a photograph, a high-resolution image that must have been taken with the latest smartphone model, the one I had bought Caleb for his birthday last month. The background was unmistakable. It was not the red rocks of Sedona, and it certainly was not the pine forests of the Cascades. It was Santorini. I recognized the whitewashed architecture, the blue domes, and the specific angle of the caldera. I recognized it because I had designed a client's villa inspired by that exact view 2 years ago. In the foreground, standing on the teak deck of a luxury yacht, was my entire world, smiling back at me with teeth that looked sharper than I remembered. Julian stood in the center. He looked radiant, sun-kissed and relaxed in a way he never was when he was around me. He was wearing a cream-colored linen suit. I knew the texture of that fabric. I knew the weight of it because I had bought it for him at a boutique in Milan during a business trip he had tagged along on his left wrist. Catching the Mediterranean sunlight was the Patek Philippe watch I had gifted him for our 10th anniversary. I remembered the price tag vividly. $52,000. I had worked 80-hour weeks for 4 months to afford that watch, telling myself that he deserved something timeless, something that proved I valued him despite my busy schedule. But it was not the watch or the suit that made the breath catch in my throat. It was his hand. His left arm was wrapped possessively around the waist of a woman who was definitely not me. She was wearing a white bikini top and a flowing, sheer skirt that left very little to the imagination. She was laughing, her head thrown back, her hand resting intimately on Julian's chest. Sienna Miller. I stared at her face, magnifying the image with my wet thumb. Sienna was 26 years old. She had been Julian's executive assistant 2 years ago. A girl fresh out of college with massive student debt and a sob story about a sick grandmother. I had hired her upon Julian's recommendation. I had mentored her. When she cried in my office about creditors calling her, I had written a personal check for $12,000 to clear her high-interest loans so she could focus on her career. I had invited her to Thanksgiving dinner when she said she had nowhere to go. Now, she was on a yacht in Greece, wearing sunglasses that cost more than her first car. Holding my husband. And behind them, that was the dagger that twisted in the wound. My mother, Beatrice, was sitting on a white leather bench in the background, holding a flute of champagne. She was wearing a wide-brimmed hat and a designer caftan I recognized from my own closet, one I had searched for just last week. She was beaming. She looked happier than she had ever looked at any of my graduations, award ceremonies, or birthday dinners. Next to her was Caleb, my baby brother, the boy whose gambling debts I had quietly paid off 3 times, the boy whose rent I covered every single month because the crypto market is about to turn around. Evie, I swear. Caleb was holding a cigar, grinning at the camera with a look of smug satisfaction that made my blood run cold. They were not in Sedona. They were not camping. They were in Greece, on a vacation that must have cost at least $40,000, spending money that undoubtedly came from the joint account I replenished every month. I stood there in the mud, feeling the cold rain seep into my collar, staring at the warmth and wealth radiating from the screen. My hands were not shaking. I found that curious. In novels, the betrayed wife always shakes. She drops the phone. She collapses. I did not collapse. I felt a strange, calcifying stillness settle over me, turning my muscles into something as hard and unyielding as the granite bedrock I dealt with daily. Then, a text bubble appeared below the photo. It was from Julian. "Don't be home when we get back. Once it's old, it's dead to me." I read the words once, then twice, then a third time. Once it's old, it's dead to me. He was talking about our marriage. He was talking about me. I was 42. Sienna was 26. In Julian's shallow, aesthetically obsessed mind, I was the old infrastructure, the crumbling foundation that had served its purpose. I was the sturdy, unglamorous retaining wall that held the dirt back so he could build his pretty glass castle. Now that he had extracted enough equity, enough status, and enough comfort, he was ready to demolish the wall. The messages kept coming. They were piling on. Drunk on champagne and cruelty, emboldened by the distance and the screen, my mother's username popped up. Beatrice, finally, a photo where everyone looks happy. You two are perfect together. So much better energy than the gloomy vibes back home. Gloomy vibes. That was what she called my exhaustion. That was what she called the nights I came home at 9 in the evening, covered in dust, too tired to cook a gourmet meal or listen to her complain about her neighbors. Then Caleb posted a screenshot of the photo to his Instagram story, which automatically synced to the chat. The caption read, "Living the good life with the real family. Free from the dark witch finally. Greece freedom new beginnings." The dark witch. That was his nickname for the sister who paid his rent. I looked up from the phone. The rain was coming down harder now, blurring the edges of the world. The construction site was a mess of gray and brown, a chaotic scar on the landscape, but across the valley, on the opposing ridge, the weather was clearing slightly. I could see it from here, my house. It sat on the highest point of the Queen Anne Hill, a masterpiece of modern architecture I had designed and paid for 5 years ago. It was known in the Architectural Digest circles as the glass monolith. $4 million of steel, reinforced glass, and imported Italian marble. It was a smart home, fully automated, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city and the sound. It was the home Julian had begged for. He wanted open concepts. He wanted light. He wanted a space that reflected his artistic soul. I preferred stone and wood, things that felt grounded. But I had built him the glass box because I loved him. I had built him a stage where he could play the role of the successful, intellectual husband, from this distance, even through the rain. It looked fragile. It looked like a glittering jewel perched precariously on the edge of the world. I looked back at the phone. Julian's text stared back at me. Once it's old, it's dead to me. He thought he was being poetic. He thought he was delivering a devastating exit line that would leave me broken, weeping in the empty halls of that glass house, waiting for his lawyers to serve me papers. He expected me to be the victim. He expected me to be the discarded first wife who fades into the background, bitter and old. He had forgotten who I was. I was not just an architect. I was a terraformer. I did not just build pretty things. I moved mountains. I stabilized cliffs. I changed the very shape of the earth to suit the needs of the project. I dealt with physics, with geology, with the brutal, indifferent laws of nature, and nature has a very specific way of dealing with dead things. You do not leave dead things out in the open to rot. You do not let them clutter the landscape. You bury them. A cold but sharp clarity sliced through my mind, sharper than any diamond cutter. I zoomed in on the photo one last time, looking at the smiles on their faces. They were raising a toast to my destruction. They were celebrating the end of Evelyn Graymont, the ATM, the workhorse, the boring wife. I swiped out of the chat and opened my banking app. I checked the joint account. Empty. Transfer limits hit. I checked the credit card authorizations. Pending charges from Santorini Yacht Charters for $12,000. Hermes Greece for $8,000. The Ritz-Carlton for $5,000. They were burning through my liquidity, confident that there was an endless spring of wealth they could tap into, or perhaps confident that by the time I noticed, the divorce filings would freeze everything in place and they would walk away with half. Julian wanted me gone. He wanted the old thing dead. Okay, I whispered to the rain. My voice was steady. Dead it is. I looked at the house on the hill again. It was no longer a home. It was a monument to my own stupidity. It was a container for a life that never existed. Julian loved that house. He loved the status it gave him. He loved the way the light hit the living room in the afternoon. He had once told me that the house was his soul in architectural form, if the marriage was dead. Then the house was a tomb, and tombs belong underground. I turned to Mike, who was watching me with concern. He must have seen the change in my posture, the way the exhaustion had evaporated, replaced by a terrifying, focused energy. Mike, I said. My voice did not sound like my own. It sounded like grinding stones. How long until we can move the heavy equipment off this site? Mike blinked, confused. The excavators. We need them here for another 2 days to finish the grading. Why? You got another emergency slide. Something like that, I said. I looked at the massive yellow Caterpillar excavator sitting idle in the mud, its bucket resting on the ground like a sleeping giant. I looked at the fleet of dump trucks lined up near the exit. I have a project that needs to be fast-tracked. A private job. Residential stabilization. Residential. Mike frowned. Boss, we don't do residential landscaping with this gear. This is heavy industrial stuff. We'd crush a driveway. I don't care about the driveway, I said. I need the D9 dozers. I need the excavators. And I need every concrete mixer we have in the rotation diverted to a new address starting tomorrow morning at 5. Mike pulled a notebook from his pocket, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. Okay, what's the address? I gave him the address, my address. He paused, his pencil hovering over the wet paper. He looked up at me, rain dripping from the brim of his hard hat. Boss, that's your house. Yes, I said. It is. What exactly are we doing there? Renovation pool installation. I looked at the photo on my phone one last time, Julian's smug smile, the way his hand rested on Sienna's hip, the pure, unadulterated entitlement in my mother's eyes. No, I said. Not a renovation. We are going to do a full geological reclamation. We are going to perform a landfill and stabilization operation. I don't follow, Mike said. I looked him in the eye. We are going to bury it. Mike, we are going to fill the first floor with concrete, and then we are going to cover the entire structure with 5,000 tons of earth. I want a hill where that house stands. I want a nice, green, rolling hill." Mike stared at me. He had worked for me for 15 years. He had seen me fire incompetent engineers, stare down corrupt city inspectors, and navigate lawsuits. He knew I did not joke about work. "You want to bury your house," he repeated slowly. "My husband said it was dead to him," I replied, shoving the phone back into my pocket. "I'm just arranging the funeral." I walked back out into the rain, feeling the cold water against my face. It felt cleansing now. The plan was forming in my mind with the precision of a blueprint. Structural integrity, load-bearing capacities, the angle of repose for the soil. I knew exactly how to do it. I knew exactly how to make it legal. And I knew exactly how to make sure that when they came back from paradise, they would find nothing but dirt. The tears never came. I did not have time for tears. I had a burial to arrange. I sat in my truck, the engine idling, the heater blasting against the cold dampness that had settled into my bones. The rain continued to drum a rhythmic beat on the roof, but inside the cabin, the silence was heavy and suffocating. I needed this moment of stillness to shift gears. I had to transition from the physical labor of the construction site to the cold, cerebral dissection of my life. My mind drifted back, unbidden, to a dinner party 3 months ago. It was a fundraiser for the local arts council, the kind of event Julian lived for and I endured. I remembered standing next to him, holding a glass of lukewarm white wine, listening to him hold court with a group of potential donors. He had his arm around my waist, but his fingers were drumming impatiently against my silk dress. "Evelyn is the bedrock of our life," he had said to a woman with too much turquoise jewelry. "Quite literally, she deals in dirt and stone. I deal in dreams and aesthetics. She brings the mud home, and I turn it into art." The group had laughed politely. I had forced a smile, but I felt the sting of it. It was a recurring theme in our marriage. Julian loved to paint me as the unrefined, pragmatic laborer to his ethereal genius. He would look at my hands, often rough from site visits despite the expensive manicures, and make a face. "You smell like loam," he would say, wrinkling his nose as if the scent of honest work was a personal affront to his delicate sensibilities. "You are so terrestrial. Evelyn, no romance, no poetry, just gravity and erosion." He made me feel small for being practical. He made me feel boring for understanding how the world actually worked while he floated above it. But here was the truth I had suppressed for years. Julian Vance was a fraud. He called himself a creative director. His LinkedIn profile was a masterpiece of buzzwords and inflated achievements. He claimed to consult for major brands, to shape the visual identities of startups. But I knew the reality. I was the one who networked with my developer clients. I was the one who whispered his name to CEOs looking for a logo redesign. I was the one who quietly injected capital into his boutique agency whenever the rent was due and the invoices were not coming in. I had built his career just as surely as I had stabilized the cliffs in Magnolia. And just like the cliffs, he was unstable, held together only by my intervention. And then there was Sienna. The image of her on that yacht burned behind my eyelids. Sienna Miller. The name tasted like ash. I remembered the day I hired her as Julian's assistant. She was 24 then, fresh out of a state university with a degree in art history and $60,000 in student loans. She had worn a cheap blazer to the interview and looked terrified. Julian had been the one to suggest her. "She has a good eye, Evie," he had told me. "She just needs a break." I gave her that break. I gave her a salary that was 20% above market rate. When she came crying to me 6 months later, hyperventilating because a collection agency was threatening to garnish her wages, I wrote the check. I sat her down in my office, handed her a tissue, and told her that financial freedom was the first step to creative freedom. "You are my hero, Evelyn," she had said, clutching the check with trembling hands. "I don't know how I will ever repay you." Apparently, She decided to repay me by sleeping with my husband and spending my money on a Greek island. I pulled my laptop out of my bag and opened it on the passenger seat. The glow of the screen illuminated the dark cabin. I needed to know the extent of the damage. I needed to see inside the house. I logged into the smart home interface. The system, designed by a subsidiary of my own company, gave me total access. I pulled up the interior camera feeds. The house was silent. The living room, with its vaulted glass ceilings and panoramic views, looked like a museum exhibit after closing time. But as I cycled through the cameras, I noticed the anomalies. In the hallway, a painting was crooked. In the study, a drawer was left pulled out. My heart hammered against my ribs as I clicked on the camera for the master bedroom. The walk-in closet door was wide open, and there, in the corner, the wall safe was gaping like a toothless mouth. I zoomed in. The safe was empty. My passport was in there, my birth certificate, the deed to the land in Montana I inherited from my father. And most importantly, the hard drive containing the backup keys to my cryptocurrency cold storage. They had not just gone on vacation, they had raided the place. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. This was premeditated. This was not a spontaneous romantic getaway. This was a heist. I opened my email client. I had administrator access to Julian's business email because, once again, I paid for the domain hosting. I had never snooped before. I respected his privacy. I respected his creative space. I typed in the password. He had never changed it from the one I set up for him 5 years ago. Artist Soul 123. The inbox loaded. I searched for Sienna. Hundreds of emails. They went back 18 months, while I was working late to fund his lifestyle. He was sending her poetry. He was sending her links to hotels. He was complaining about me. She is so controlling. One email read, "She treats me like a child just because she handles the bills. I feel suffocated by her practicality. I need a muse. Sienna, I need you." I scrolled past the nausea to the most recent thread, dated 4 days ago. The subject line was the exit strategy. My finger hovered over the trackpad. I clicked it. Julian to Sienna. Don't worry about the cash flow. Babe, once we get back, I am listing the glass cage. I checked the Zillow estimate. It is valued at $4.2 million, even with a quick sale. We walk away with at least 3.8. That is nearly $2 million for each of us. I can take half. It is marital property. She can keep her dirt company. I am taking the house money. We will be set for a long time. I stared at the screen. A laugh bubbled up in my throat, a dry, jagged sound that startled me. The glass cage. That was what he called the architectural marvel I had built for him. $2 million. That was what he thought he was entitled to. Julian Vance was a man who focused so much on aesthetics that he never bothered to read the fine print. He assumed that because we were married. Everything I touched was half his. He assumed that because he lived in the house, picked out the curtains, and hosted parties there, he owned it. He was wrong. I closed the email and opened a folder on my secure drive labeled Assets Corporate. I pulled up the deed for the house at 772 Skyline Drive. The owner listed on the deed was not Evelyn Graymont, and it certainly was not Julian Vance. The owner was Apex Terraforming Landscape, LLC. The house was not a residential home in the eyes of the law or the IRS. It was classified as a geological eco-dwelling prototype. It was a research site. I had built it to test a new type of seismic-resistant foundation and high-efficiency thermal glass for my company. I lived there as a caretaker and lead researcher. The company paid the mortgage. The company paid the taxes. The company paid for the maintenance. Julian had never paid a dime, not for the down payment, not for the monthly notes, not for the repairs. And because it was a corporate asset, completely separate from our personal marital finances, he had absolutely no claim to it. It was no different than him trying to sell the excavator sitting on my job site. I leaned back in the seat, the leather creaking. He was going to come back, try to sell a building he did not own, and realize he had zero equity. But wait, if he was this confident, if he was already spending money he did not have, he must have a plan to circumvent the ownership issue. I went back to the emails. I found a forwarded attachment in a thread with a shady-looking mortgage broker. It was a quitclaim deed, a document transferring ownership from Apex Terraforming to Julian Vance and Evelyn Graymont as joint tenants. And at the bottom, above my typed name, was a signature. It was a good forgery. He had practiced. It looked almost exactly like the way I signed my checks, but the loop on the Y in Graymont was slightly too wide. My blood ran cold, then immediately hot with rage. He had forged my signature to transfer the property title. He was trying to steal the house out from under my company before he even filed for divorce. This changed everything. This was not just a heartbreak. This was a felony. I closed the laptop with a snap. I remembered the day we signed our prenuptial agreement. We were in the conference room of Harper Stein's law firm. Harper, my lawyer, was a shark in a Chanel suit. She had laid the document out on the mahogany table, thick and imposing. "Julian," Harper had said, her voice clipped and professional, "I need you to read this carefully. It stipulates that any assets acquired through Evelyn's business entities remain sole property of those entities. It also separates any intellectual property or real estate held by Apex." Julian had sighed, a dramatic exhalation that ruffled his perfectly styled hair. He had not even picked up the pen to read. He just looked at me with those puppy dog eyes that used to make my knees weak. "Evie, really," he had said, "I don't care about the legalese. I don't care about the money. I am marrying you for your soul, not your portfolio. If signing this paper makes your lawyers happy, fine." He had grabbed the pen and scribbled his signature without reading a single word. He had signed away his rights to the house, to my company, to everything I built, because he was too arrogant to believe that a woman like me, earthy, boring Evelyn, would ever leave a golden god like him. He thought he was the prize. He thought his presence was the only currency he needed. He was a fool, a dangerous, greedy fool. I looked out the windshield. The rain was easing up, transforming into a light mist. The anger that had been simmering in my gut began to crystallize into something useful, something structural. If I simply divorced him, we would fight in court for months. He would use the forged documents to muddy the waters. He would claim he contributed sweat equity to the house. He would drag my name and my company through the mud. But if the house did not exist, if the geological eco-dwelling prototype was deemed structurally unsound or obsolete by the CEO of the owning company, if the company decided to reclaim the land for a new project, I had the legal right to modify my corporate assets. Julian wanted to sell the glass cage. He wanted to liquidate my hard work to fund his life with Sienna. I let out a breath I did not know I was holding. The sadness was gone. The betrayal was there. Yes, but it was buried under layers of professional disdain. I did not hate him anymore. Hate implies passion. What I felt now was the cold, clinical assessment of a liability. He was a termite. He had burrowed into my life, eaten away at my foundations, and now he was trying to bring the whole structure down. You do not reason with termites. You do not ask them to leave nicely. You exterminate them, and then you bury the infested wood so deep that nothing can ever crawl out of it again. I put the truck in gear. The engine roared to life, a powerful mechanical sound that vibrated through the steering wheel. $2 million, I said aloud to the empty cab. You are not going to get 2 cents. Julian, I was not just going to bury a house. I was going to bury his retirement plan. I was going to bury his ego. And I was going to do it with the full weight of the law and 5,000 tons of soil on my side. I dialed Harper Stein's number. It was late, but she would answer. She always answered for her biggest client. "Evelyn." Harper's voice was sharp, alert. "Everything okay?" "No," I said, merging onto the highway, heading toward the depot where the heavy machinery was parked. "But it is about to be. I need you to draft a liability waiver for an emergency landscape reclamation, and Harper, clear your schedule for next week. We are going to have a very interesting homecoming party." The blueprint of betrayal was clear. Now, it was time to execute the demolition order. Or rather, the burial. Harper, I need you to clarify the asset utilization clause in the Apex Corporate Charter, I said. My phone pressed to my ear as I merged onto the Interstate 5 South, heading toward the company depot. Harper Stein did not ask for pleasantries. She was the kind of lawyer who billed in 6-minute increments and expected clients to be just as efficient. I could hear the click of her lighter on the other end, followed by a sharp exhale. Article 4, Section C, Harper recited from memory, her voice crisp. The Chief Executive Officer retains unilateral discretion to modify, renovate, repurpose, or decommission any physical asset designated as research and development prototype, if said asset is deemed obsolete, structurally compromised, or no longer aligned with the company's strategic vision. Why, what are you planning? Evelyn, I am deeming the Skyline Drive prototype obsolete, I said, keeping my eyes on the wet road. I am initiating a full-scale geological reclamation. I am not going to demolish it. Harper, demolition implies waste. I am going to repurpose it. I am going to turn it into a high-density earthen stabilization feature. There was a pause on the line, a long one, then a low, appreciative hum. You are going to bury it, Harper stated. It was not a question. I am going to bury it, I confirmed. Is that legal? If Apex owns the land and the structure, which we do, Harper said, the sound of typing filling the background, and if you have the permits for grading and fill, you can pile as much dirt on your own property as you want. Just make sure you do not destabilize the neighboring lots. And Evelyn, if there is personal property inside, legally, you should make a reasonable effort to retrieve it. However, if the site conditions are deemed too hazardous for entry, well, collateral damage happens in construction. Understood, I said. Paper the file. Harper, I want the liability waivers ready by morning. Consider it done, and Evelyn have fun. I hung up and dialed the dispatch office. The sun was setting, casting long, bruised shadows across the Seattle skyline. But my workday was just beginning. Dispatch, this is Graymont, I barked as soon as the line connected. Cancel the equipment transfer to the Tacoma site. I need the heavy fleet. I want the D9 dozers, the articulated dump trucks, and the high-capacity concrete pumps rerouted to the Skyline Drive location. I need them staged and ready to roll at 5 in the morning. 5 in the morning. Boss, the dispatcher sounded confused. That is a residential zone. The noise ordinance. I will handle the noise ordinance. I cut him off. Just get the iron on the ground. I pulled up to the house 20 minutes later. The rain had stopped, leaving the air smelling of wet asphalt and ozone. The house, my house. Julian's glass cage glowed softly in the twilight. The automated systems had turned on the ambient lighting, making the structure look like a lantern floating in the dark. It was beautiful. It was expensive. It was a lie. I parked the truck and walked to the front door, my boots crunching on the gravel. I did not feel nostalgia. I felt like a coroner arriving at a crime scene to clean up the mess. I punched in the code. The door slid open with a smooth, expensive hiss. The air inside was still and cool, scented with the sandalwood diffuser Julian insisted on keeping running 24 hours a day. I walked through the foyer, my muddy boots leaving streaks on the imported limestone tiles. I did not care. Those tiles would be under 3 feet of concrete by tomorrow afternoon. I walked into the living room. It was a shrine to Julian's ego. His awards participation trophies from minor design contests were displayed on the mantel. His collection of vintage sneakers, worth perhaps $40,000, was lined up on custom-built shelving along the north wall. I stood in front of the shelves. A pair of limited edition Air Jordans stared back at me. He loved these shoes more than he loved me. He wiped them down with a special cloth every Sunday. I reached out and touched the heel of one. Structural fill, I whispered. I moved to his gaming room. The custom PC rig, a monstrosity of neon lights and cooling tubes that had cost $8,000, sat on the desk. He spent hours here, screaming at strangers over the internet while I reviewed engineering reports in the kitchen. I left it all. The shoes, the computer, the closet full of Italian suits, the drawer full of silk ties. They were part of the house. They were part of the rot. If I packed them up, if I saved them, I would be acknowledging that they had value. I would be acknowledging that he had a place to come back to. Leaving them was the statement. It said, "Your things are as worthless as your loyalty." I walked past the master bedroom without looking at the bed. I went straight to the small utility room off the kitchen. A low, rhythmic thumping sound greeted me. "Hey, old man," I said softly, kneeling down. Barnaby, my 12-year-old golden retriever, lifted his head from his bed. His muzzle was gray, and his eyes were cloudy with cataracts. He thumped his tail against the floor again. Julian hated Barnaby. He called him the rug because the dog slept so much. He constantly complained about the shedding, about the smell, about the way Barnaby clicked his claws on the floor. He had tried to convince me to put Barnaby down last year, saying it was cruel to keep him alive, but I knew he just wanted to replace him with a sleek, hairless cat that matched the furniture. "Come on, buddy," I said, clipping the leash onto his collar. "We are going on a trip, somewhere with no stairs and no shouting." Barnaby groaned but stood up, leaning his weight against my leg. I led him out to the truck and lifted him into the passenger seat. He curled up immediately. Safe. I went back inside for one last sweep. I went to the hidden safe in the floor of the pantry, the one Julian did not know about because he never cooked. I spun the dial and lifted the heavy steel lid. Inside were the incorporation papers for Apex terraforming, the original blueprints for my first major bridge project, and a small, tarnished silver compass. It had belonged to my father. He was a simple contractor, a man who smelled like sawdust and coffee. He died before I made my first million, but he was the only man who had ever looked at me with pride without wanting something in return. "Build it strong, Evie," he used to tell me. "And if the foundation is bad, do not patch it, tear it out, and start over." I closed my hand around the cool metal of the compass. "I am starting over, Dad," I said. "But first, I have to bury the mistake." I put the documents and the compass in my waterproof bag. I took nothing else. No clothes, no jewelry, no photos. The photos on the wall, pictures of Julian and me smiling at galas, on vacations. At weddings were lies frozen in time. They belonged to the house. They would die with the house. I walked out the front door and locked it behind me. By 5 o'clock the next morning, the street looked like a war zone. The convoy had arrived. 3 massive articulated dump trucks, 2 concrete mixer trucks, and a flatbed carrying a Caterpillar 349 excavator blocked the entire cul-de-sac. The engines idled with a deep, guttural rumble that shook the pavement. Mike Sledgehammer Kowalski was waiting for me by the gate. Mike was 6'4", shaped like a refrigerator, and had been my foreman for 10 years. He was drinking coffee from a thermos the size of a fire extinguisher. He watched me approach, his eyes scanning the equipment I had assembled. "Morning, boss," Mike said. He nodded toward the house. "So, this is the patient." "This is the patient," I said. "And the prognosis is terminal." Mike scratched his chin, the sound of his stubble rasping like sandpaper. "I looked at the specs you sent over. You want to pump high-slump concrete into the ground floor, fill it up to the ceiling joists." "Correct," I said, unrolling the site plan on the hood of my truck. "We seal the doors and windows with marine-grade plywood and steel bracing. Then we pump the concrete in through the skylights. We fill the entire first level. That creates a solid, monolithic base. The furniture, the appliances, the walls, it all becomes aggregate." Mike let out a low whistle. "That is expensive aggregate, boss. There is a grand piano in there." "The piano is out of tune," I said flatly. "Once the concrete cures, the first floor will be a solid block. It will be stable enough to support the earth load. Then, we use the dozers to push the soil up and over. We cover the second floor. We cover the roof. We grade it at a 30-degree slope to prevent erosion. When we are done, the house will be the core of the hill." Mike looked at the house, then back at me. He did not ask about Julian. He did not ask about the divorce. He knew me. He knew that if I was doing this, I had a reason that was heavier than the concrete we were about to pour. "You are the boss," Mike said, screwing the lid back on his thermos. "If you pay the invoices, I will bury the Vatican." "Good man," I said. "Start the mixers." The sound of the hydraulic pumps engaging was like a starting gun. The crew moved with the precision of a military unit. They began boarding up the windows of the first floor, drilling steel braces into the expensive cedar siding. I stood by the truck, watching. A light flicked on in the house next door. Mrs. Gable. She was the neighborhood watch captain, a woman who measured grass height with a ruler and reported anyone who left their trash cans out for more than an hour. She came marching out of her front door in a pink bathrobe, clutching her phone like a weapon. "Evelyn!" she shrieked over the roar of the engines. "Evelyn Graymont!" What on earth is going on? "It is 5 a.m. I'm calling the police." I walked over to the property line, keeping my face mask of professional concern perfectly in place. "Mrs. Gable," I said, raising my voice to be heard, but keeping the tone calm. "I am so sorry for the disturbance. We have a crisis." "A crisis," she faltered, lowering the phone slightly. "What kind of crisis?" "Geological instability," I lied smoothly. "My monitoring equipment picked up a severe shift in the bedrock at 3 this morning. A micro-fissure has opened up directly beneath my foundation. If we do not stabilize it immediately within the next 6 hours, the entire hillside could shear off." I pointed dramatically toward her house. "And if my house goes, Mrs. Gable, it could pull the surrounding soil with it. Your pool, your rose garden, they could all slide into the ravine." Mrs. Gable's face went pale. The threat of losing property value was the only thing that terrified her more than noise. "Oh my God," she whispered. Is it safe for us to stay?" "We are enacting an emergency containment protocol," I said, using the most technical-sounding nonsense I could think of. "We have to weigh down the structure to anchor the soil. That is why the concrete trucks are here. We are creating a gravity anchor. It is the only way to save the neighborhood." "Do whatever you have to do," she gasped, clutching her robe tighter. "Do you need me to move my car?" "Just stay inside and keep clear of the windows," I advised. "We will handle it." She scurried back into her house, presumably to call her insurance agent. I turned back to Mike. He was grinning. "Micro-fissure," he asked. "Fear is a great motivator," I said. "Now, let's get the permits posted before the city wakes up." I pulled out my phone and called Gary at the Department of Planning and Development. Gary owed me. I had saved his job 3 years ago when a retaining wall on a municipal project failed, and I provided the expert testimony that proved it was a materials defect. Not his oversight. "Gary," I said when he answered, his voice thick with sleep. "I need an emergency grading permit for the Skyline property. Expedited. Code red." "Evelyn," Gary groaned. "It is dawn. What are you doing?" "I am preventing a catastrophic structural failure," I said. "I am emailing you the application now. I need the digital stamp by 7. Can you do it?" "For you, yeah." Gary sighed. "But you owe me lunch. A really expensive lunch." "I will buy you a steakhouse," I promised. I hung up. The sun was cresting over the horizon now, painting the sky in shades of violent orange and purple. The first concrete mixer backed up to the front of the house. The chute extended, looking like the proboscis of a giant insect. It positioned itself over the opening we had cut into the main skylight. Mike looked at me, his hand on the lever. "Ready to pour," he shouted. I looked at the house one last time. I thought about the text message. Once it's old, it's dead to me. I thought about Julian's laugh. I thought about the way he looked at Sienna. I thought about the 12 years I had spent building a life inside those walls, only to find out I was just the caretaker of his comfort. "Pour it," I said. The lever turned, the drum spun, and with a wet, heavy slurp, the gray sludge began to flow. It cascaded down into the living room. burying the limestone tiles, burying the awards, burying the silence. The burial had begun. The sound of destruction is not a crash or a bang, it is a grind. It is the deep, resonant vibration of engines that are larger than the things they are destroying. At 5 a.m, the convoy of concrete mixers rolled down Skyline Drive like a mechanized funeral procession. Their headlights cut through the lingering morning mist, illuminating the manicured hedges and wrought iron gates of my neighbors. The rumble was low and constant, a bass note that you felt in your teeth before you heard it with your ears. I stood on the edge of the driveway, holding a travel mug of black coffee. The heat of the metal cup seeped into my gloved hands, grounding me against the chill. I watched the first truck maneuver into position, its reverse beeper echoing off the canyon walls, beep, beep, beep. A shrill countdown to the end of an era. The chute swung out, the drum rotated with a hypnotic, grinding rhythm, and then the gray river began to flow. It started in the living room. I watched through the panoramic window, which we had left unboarded for a few minutes, just so the crew could monitor the fill rate. The concrete, thick and heavy, poured over the white Italian leather sofa Julian had insisted we buy. That sofa had cost $15,000. He had thrown a fit when Barnaby once sniffed it, claiming the dog's breath would ruin the leather. Now, the gray sludge hit the cushions with a wet slap. It pooled, rose, and swallowed the armrests. The pristine white vanished under the relentless tide of industrial mix. I took a sip of coffee. It tasted bitter and clean. "Keep it coming," I said into my radio. "Do not stop until you hit the ceiling joists." The flow intensified. The concrete surged into the hallway, creeping toward the entertainment room. This was Julian's sanctuary. This was where he sat for hours in front of his webcam, streaming to his 300 followers, complaining about how his creativity was being stifled by his corporate drone wife. I had heard him once, standing outside the door with a tray of sandwiches I had made him, listening as he told strangers that I had no soul. "Fill it," I whispered. The concrete breached the threshold of the entertainment room. It surrounded his custom gaming chair. It buried the tangle of expensive cables. It rose up the walls, covering the soundproofing foam he had installed to keep my voice out. It was erasing his voice. It was filling the space where his complaints used to echo with solid, silent stone. By 8 a.m, the first floor was gone. It was a solid block of curing concrete. The windows were boarded now, the steel braces holding firm against the immense outward pressure. Then came the dirt. The dump trucks lined up, their beds raised high like saluting soldiers. They carried heavy, red clay soil compact, dense, and unforgiving. The first load dropped onto the roof of the garage with a thunderous crash that shook the ground beneath my boots. The glass of the skylights shattered, a tinkling, delicate sound that was instantly drowned out by the roar of the cascading earth. Dust billowed up, a red cloud that momentarily obscured the sun. "Dozers, move in." Mike's voice crackled over the radio. "Start the grading. We want a 30-degree slope. Pack it tight." The D9 bulldozers roared to life. Their massive steel blades pushed the mountain of dirt forward, rolling it over the structure. They climbed the pile, their tracks grinding the soil, compressing it, shaping it. They pushed the dirt over the second-floor balcony. I remembered standing there on our wedding day, waving to guests on the lawn below. Julian had looked so handsome, so promising. A wave of red clay crashed over the railing, burying the spot where we had said, "I do." It obliterated the memory. It covered the lies. By 10 a.m, the police arrived. 2 squad cars pulled up, lights flashing, but sirens off. Officer Miller, no relation to Sienna, thankfully stepped out, adjusting his belt. He looked bewildered. The neighbors were gathered on the sidewalk across the street, pointing and whispering, their phones out, recording the spectacle. "Ms. Graymont," Officer Miller said, walking over to where I stood by the site trailer. He had to shout over the noise of the excavators. "We have getting calls, a lot of calls. People think there is an earthquake or a landslide." "Officer," I said calmly, pulling a binder from the trailer. Good to see you. No earthquake, just emergency stabilization. I handed him the permits. They were stamped, signed, and perfectly legal. We detected a critical failure in the subgrade, I explained, pointing to a graph I had generated on my laptop, a graph that showed scary red lines dipping into chaos. It was a simulation of a landslide, but he did not need to know that. If we do not load balance this slope immediately, the entire property could slide into the ravine. I am legally obligated to secure the site to protect the public infrastructure below. Officer Miller looked at the permits. He looked at the massive bulldozers burying a $4 million house. He looked back at me. Yeah. You are burying the house, he asked. The structure is compromised, I said. It is serving as the anchor for the fill. It is standard procedure in extreme geological reclamation. He flipped through the pages. The liability waivers were there. The city stamps were there. The engineering report signed by me. A licensed civil engineer was there. Well, he said, handing the binder back, it looks like everything is in order. Just try to keep the dust down. The neighbors are worried about their cars. We have water trucks on standby to spray the site, I assured him. Dust control is a priority. He nodded, tipped his cap, and walked back to the neighbors to explain that everything was fine. Just a little emergency terraforming. I watched Mrs. Gable's face fall as she realized she could not gossip about a crime. Only a construction project. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a FaceTime request. Hubby? The screen showed his face, pixelated but clear enough. He was grinning, wearing sunglasses, the blue Aegean sky behind him. He wanted to show me the view. He wanted to brag. He wanted to make sure I knew he was having the time of his life while I was stuck in the rain. I stared at the ringing phone, the urge to answer, to turn the camera around and show him the mountain of dirt that used to be his castle, was strong. I wanted to see his face crumble, but no, that was too easy. That was impulsive. Revenge is a dish best served cold, and it is best served when the guest arrives at the table expecting a feast, only to find an empty plate. I declined the call. I opened my text messages and typed a reply. Sorry, can't talk. Handling some house issues, a lot of maintenance to catch up on. You just enjoy your trip. Don't worry about a thing. I hit send. Then I watched as a bulldozer pushed a massive boulder over the edge of the fill pile. It rolled down and settled directly over where the front door used to be. Thud. By late afternoon, the house was gone. The sun was beginning to dip low, casting a golden light over the new landscape, where there had once been sharp angles, glass walls, and steel beams. There was now a gentle, rolling hill. It was a massive mound of red earth, rising 20 feet into the air, completely obscuring the structure beneath. 5,000 tons of soil, 500 cubic yards of concrete. It was silent now. The engines had stopped. The birds were starting to chirp tentatively in the nearby trees. It looks peaceful, Mike said, standing next to me. He wiped grease from his hands with a rag. It is a tomb, I said. Now, let's make it pretty. I signaled to the landscaping crew. They had been waiting in the wings with rolls of sod and mature saplings. Roll it out, I ordered. I want this to look like a park by sunset. I want it green. I want it lush. I want it to look like it has been here for 100 years. The crew moved in. They unrolled the emerald green sod over the raw earth, stitching the seams together until the red clay vanished. They dug holes and planted the trees. Japanese maples, weeping willows, trees that symbolized peace and mourning. By twilight, the transformation was complete. I stood on the sidewalk and looked at my work. The modern monstrosity was gone. In its place was a serene, grassy knoll. It looked natural. It looked permanent. It looked like the earth had simply risen up and swallowed the arrogance of the man who lived there. I took a picture. I did not send it to anyone. I saved it in a folder named The Aftermath. I got into my truck, Barnaby snoring softly in the passenger seat. My body ached from standing all day, but my mind was clear. The first phase was done. The physical erasure was complete. Now, the real game began. Now, I just had to wait for them to come home and try to find the key to a door that was buried under 20 feet of dirt. The silence that follows a burial is usually heavy with grief. But in my case, it was heavy with the rustle of paper and the clicking of keys. While the freshly laid sod on Skyline Drive was knitting itself into the red clay earth, effectively erasing the physical evidence of my marriage. I was sitting 40 floors up in the pristine, air-conditioned war room of Harper Stein's law firm. The city of Boston sprawled out below us, a grid of lights and movement, but my focus was entirely on the 3 manila folders spread across the polished mahogany table. We were not waiting for the grass to grow. We were digging. Harper sat across from me, looking less like a lawyer and more like a forensic surgeon about to perform an autopsy. She tapped a perfectly manicured nail on the first folder. It was labeled Sienna Miller. "You know," Harper said, her voice dry and devoid of sympathy, "I always assumed your husband left you for a younger model because of the usual midlife crisis cliches. But this is not just a cliche. It is a merger and acquisition strategy gone wrong." I took a sip of sparkling water. "Explain." Harper slid the folder toward me. "Julian thinks he is trading up. He thinks Sienna is some sort of high society influencer with family money. I ran a full background check, credit history, an asset search on her. Evelyn, the girl is not just broke, she is insolvent." I opened the file. The numbers stared back at me in black and red. Sienna Miller, 26 years old. Occupation freelance social media consultant. Annual reported income $24,000. But the liabilities column was where the story really got interesting. Student loans, $82,000. Credit card debt spread across 7 different high-interest cards, $46,000. Outstanding car payments on a leased Range Rover she could not afford, $12,000. "She is drowning," I said, reading the report. "She is literally financing her life on credit cards she opens in her parents' names." "It gets better," Harper said, a cruel little smile playing on her lips. I subpoenaed her emails and text logs, legal gray area, but useful for context. Look at the chat log from 3 months ago, the one with her roommate. I flipped to the flagged page. The text conversation was printed out in stark courier font. "Sienna, I can't keep doing this. Jess, the creditors are calling my mom. I need a way out. Jess, what about that old guy you're seeing, the one with the architecture wife, Sienna Julian? Yeah, he's annoying, but he says he's loaded. He told me he owns the patents for the company. He says the wife is just the face, but he's the silent genius behind the tech. He promised that once they divorce, he gets 50% of the patent royalties. That's like millions. Jess, if I stick it out until the papers are signed, I'm set for life." I lowered the paper, a cold laugh escaping my throat. "He told her he owns my patents. The Hydrolock Soil Stabilization System," Harper confirmed. "The patent that earned Apex $12 million last fiscal year. Julian told her he invented it in the garage and let you put your name on it for branding purposes. He can barely operate a toaster," I said, shaking my head. "He thinks dirt is messy. He has never set foot in the lab." "Sienna does not know that," Harper said. "She sees the suits, the car, the house you just buried, and she sees a golden parachute. She is not sleeping with him because he is a creative soul. Evelyn, she is sleeping with him because she thinks he is her debt relief program." It was almost tragic. 2 con artists trying to scam each other. Julian thought he was marrying into youth and admiration. Sienna thought she was marrying into intellectual property royalties. When the dust settled, they would both find themselves holding nothing but empty pockets and lies. "What about the others?" I asked, pushing Sienna's sad financial autopsy aside. "My family," Harper's expression hardened. She pulled the second and third folders forward. "Beatrice Graymont and Caleb Graymont." "This part is going to hurt," Harper warned me. "It is one thing to have a greedy husband. It is another to have a family that cannibalizes you. I am already bleeding." "Harper," I said, "just show me the wound." She opened my mother's file first. You set up a rainy day retirement fund for Beatrice 5 years ago, the Golden Years Trust. You have been depositing $2,000 a month into it, intended for her future medical care or assisted living. I know, I said. It had about $120,000 in it last time I checked. I gave her signature authority in case of emergencies. Well, Harper said, sliding a bank statement across the table. She had an emergency. Apparently, the definition of emergency includes 3 business-class tickets to Athens on Emirates Air, a suite at the Grand Bretagne Hotel, and a charter deposit for a yacht called the Aphrodite. I looked at the withdrawal dates. 2 weeks ago, a single lump sum transfer of $48,000, then another for $12,000, then a series of cash withdrawals. The balance of the Golden Years Trust was currently $412. She drained it, I whispered. She liquidated her own future to pay for a vacation to celebrate my divorce. She thinks there is more where that came from, Harper said. In her mind, you are an infinite resource. She assumes you will just refill the bucket because you always have. She does not respect the money because she never had to earn it. I closed my eyes for a second. I could hear my mother's voice in my head, criticizing my work clothes, telling me I looked tired, telling me I should be more supportive of Julian, all while she was stealing the safety net I had woven for her. And Caleb, I asked, opening my eyes. Let me guess. Gambling. Worse, Harper said. Identity theft and loan sharks. She opened the final folder. It contained a series of documents from a shadowy lending firm called Quick Capital Solutions, which was a polite name for predatory lenders who break kneecaps. Caleb is deep into a crypto scheme, Harper explained. He leveraged everything he had, lost it when the market dipped last month, and then tried to double down to win it back. He owes these people $150,000, but here's the kicker. Evelyn, he did not use his own credit. He does not have any. She pointed to a loan application. The applicant's name was Caleb Graymont, but the guarantor listed was Evelyn Graymont, CEO Apex Terraforming. He forged my signature, I asked, my voice deadly quiet. He used your social security number, Harper corrected. He used your driver's license information. He impersonated you electronically to co-sign a high-risk loan. He is banking on Julian getting a massive settlement so he can beg Julian for a loan to pay this off before the sharks come collecting, or that he assumes that when the lenders come after you, you will just pay it to avoid the scandal. I sat back in the leather chair, the air in the room feeling suddenly thin. I had spent my entire adult life building a fortress. I built walls to hold back landslides. I built foundations to withstand earthquakes. I thought I was protecting the world from nature, but I had failed to protect myself from the people inside my own walls. They were not family. They were a colony of parasites. They had attached themselves to my success, sucking the marrow from my bones, and now that they thought the host was dying, or at least, shedding a husband, they were in a feeding frenzy. They are all waiting for the payout, I said, the realization crystallizing into cold resolve. Sienna needs the patent money to pay her debts. Caleb needs the settlement to save his life. Beatrice needs the divorce to validate her choices and keep the party going. And Julian just wants to be rich without working. Exactly, Harper said. So, what do you want to do? We can file fraud charges against Caleb. We can sue Beatrice for misuse of trust funds. We can expose Sienna. No, I said, sitting up straight. Not yet. Legal battles take time. I want them to feel it now. I want them to feel the oxygen leave the room. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. Do you have the access codes for the joint accounts? I do, Harper said. And as your attorney, I must inform you that draining a marital asset account can be looked upon unfavorably by a judge. I am not draining it, I said, opening the banking app. I am freezing it to prevent suspicious activity. After all, my husband is supposed to be camping in the Cascades. If charges are appearing from Greece, surely his identity has been stolen. I tapped the screen. Joint checking frozen. Joint savings frozen. Then I opened the credit card management portal. The black card. The one Julian carried like a badge of honor. The one Beatrice was currently using to buy cocktails. The one Caleb was probably using to buy cigars. Authorized user Julian Vance. Suspended. Authorized user Beatrice Graymont. Suspended. Authorized user Caleb Graymont. Suspended. I just cut the feeding tube, I said, placing the phone on the table. Now we wait, Harper said, checking her watch. Greece is 7 hours ahead. It is evening there. Dinner time. We did not have to wait long. 20 minutes later, my phone lit up. It was a push notification from the bank security app. Transaction declined. Hermes, Athens. Amount €4,200. Reason card. Suspended by administrator. 2 minutes later, another notification. Transaction declined. The Grand Bretagne Hotel Bar. Amount €350. Reason card suspended. Then, the phone started to ring. The screen flashed. Hubby. I let it ring. It stopped. Then it rang again. Hubby. Then Mom. Then Caleb. My phone danced across the mahogany table, vibrating with their panic. They were standing in a high-end boutique, or a restaurant, or a bar, realizing that the magic plastic rectangle was nothing more than a piece of useless plastic. They were realizing that the ATM had not just stopped dispensing cash, it had shut down the branch. I imagined the scene. Julian trying to laugh it off to the cashier. Oh, bank error. Let me call my wife. Sienna looking at him with sudden suspicion. Beatrice fumbling through her purse for cash she did not have. Caleb sweating as he realized his lifeline was cut. Are you going to answer? Harper asked, watching the phone buzz. No, I said. I'm going to sleep. I picked up the phone and held down the power button. The screen went dark. The buzzing stopped. The silence returned. But this time, it was not the silence of a victim. It was the silence of a judge who had just banged the gavel. I have a new apartment, I told Harper, standing up and gathering my things. A penthouse in the seaport. Nobody knows about it. Not Julian, not my mother. It is under the corporate name. Go, Harper said. I will keep the sharks at bay. Sleep well. Evelyn. I drove to the seaport district in the quiet of the night. My new building was glass and steel, sharp and clean. I took the private elevator to the top floor. The apartment was empty of memories. It smelled of fresh paint and sea air. There were no vintage sneakers, no dog hair, though Barnaby would join me tomorrow, no ghosts of a failed marriage. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked out at the harbor. Somewhere across the ocean. My husband was likely yelling at a hotel concierge, humiliating himself. Somewhere in the city, my buried house lay under the moonlight, a secret grave. I stripped off my work clothes and climbed into the bed. The sheets were cool and crisp, for the first time in 10 years. I did not check my email before closing my eyes. I did not worry about Julian's ego. I did not worry about my mother's approval. I fell asleep instantly, wrapped in the comforting darkness of my own making, knowing that when I woke up, the world would be a very different place for the people who had tried to break me. They were about to learn that you never, ever bite the hand that feeds you, especially when that hand knows how to operate a bulldozer. The silence before a storm is usually described as oppressive. A heavy atmospheric pressure that makes the air hard to breathe. But the silence that descended on my life in the 48 hours after I buried my house was not heavy. It was crisp. It was electric. It was the hum of a high-voltage wire waiting for someone to touch it, while I sat in the climate-controlled serenity of my executive suite at Apex Terraforming. Sipping herbal tea and reviewing quarterly projections, I knew that 5,000 miles away, in the white-hot heat of Athens, my husband was experiencing a meltdown that had nothing to do with the temperature. I could see the ripples of his panic through the digital window of our shared banking app. For the first 12 hours after I froze the accounts, he had tried to call the bank 17 times. I knew this because the fraud alert notifications kept pinging my phone, each one a desperate attempt by an unauthorized user to bypass security protocols. Julian Vance was learning a very hard lesson about banking hierarchy. He was an authorized user on the accounts. Yes, He had a card with his name on it. But I was the primary account holder. I was the signatory. I was the one who had established the relationship with the private wealth division of the bank 10 years before I even met him. When the primary holder flags an account for suspected identity theft and compromise, the bank does not ask questions. They lock the vault. They were stranded. I imagined the scene in the lobby of the Grand Bretagne Hotel. The concierge, polite but firm, explaining that their cards were declining. My mother, Beatrice, likely feigning a fainting spell to distract from the humiliation. Caleb, sweating through his linen shirt, realizing he could not pay his gambling debts. And Sienna, the influencer, realizing that her sugar daddy was currently insolvent. They had to check out 3 days early. I tracked their movement through the few travel alerts that still came through to my email. They had used the last of their cash, the physical euros they had withdrawn before the freeze, to pay the hotel penalty and change their flight tickets. They were not flying first class this time. There were no champagne toasts or legroom. They were crammed into economy seats on a budget airline for the first leg of the trip. Flying home early. Not because they missed me, but because they were broke. They were coming back to fix the glitch. They were coming back to yell at me, to demand I call the bank, to reestablish the flow of money that they believed was their birthright. They still had no idea that they were homeless. I spent those 2 days working from my office. I had moved a few essentials there, a change of clothes, my laptop, and Barnaby's dog bed, which sat in the corner of the room. My staff walked on tiptoes around me. They knew something was happening. They had seen the heavy equipment moving. The rumors of the emergency stabilization at my house had circulated, but nobody dared to ask the CEO why she was sleeping on the leather sofa in her office. I was not just sleeping. I was preparing for war. On the large oak desk in front of me, I had arranged the ammunition. It was not a chaotic pile of papers. It was a curated exhibition of evidence. To the left, the divorce petition. Harper had drafted it with brutal efficiency. Irreconcilable differences, yes, but also a detailed addendum regarding financial infidelity. In the center, the fraud dossier. This was the heavy hitter, the loan applications Caleb had forged, the bank records showing my mother's embezzlement of her own trust fund, the emails between Julian and Sienna conspiring to sell my corporate property. To the right, the property deeds, the proof that Apex Terraforming owned the land, the structure, and the air rights of 772 Skyline Drive. I was ready. But the stage needed one final touch. On the afternoon of the second day, I drove back to the site. The transformation was settling in. The sod we had laid down was taking root, knitting together to form a seamless carpet of green. The trees we had planted, 2 weeping willows and a cluster of Japanese maples, swayed gently in the breeze. It did not look like a construction site anymore. It did not look like a disaster zone. It looked like a piece of deliberate, high-concept land art. It was beautiful in a terrifying way. Beneath that innocent grassy knoll lay a $4 million life. The piano was down there. The wedding dress was down there. The lies were down there. I walked to the base of the hill, right where the mailbox still stood, stubbornly marking the address of a ghost. I had commissioned a small plaque from the company's metal shop, made of brushed bronze. I took a power drill and mounted it to a large decorative stone I had placed near the curb. The plaque read, Greymont Memory Conservation Project established 2026. Let the earth reclaim what is no longer true. It sounded profound. It sounded philanthropic. Passers-by would read it and think I had donated the land for a park. They would never guess it was a tombstone. As I was admiring the plaque, my phone buzzed. I was holding Julian's iPad, which I had retrieved from the house before the pour. I had kept it charged and synced to his cloud account. A message popped up on the screen. It was from Topher, one of Julian's creative friends, a man who wore scarves in the summer and called himself a visionary. Topher had evidently driven past the house. The text read, What is happening at your crib? Did you guys move? Why is your house a park? Attached was a photo, a grainy drive-by shot of the green hill where the glass mansion used to be. I watched the screen, waiting. I knew Julian had his phone on him. He was likely at a layover in Frankfurt or London by now, connecting to the airport Wi-Fi. 3 dots appeared. Julian was typing. Julian lol. Nice Photoshop. Toff. Very funny. We are dealing with some bank drama. Don't have time for your pranks. Topher replied immediately. Dude, I'm standing in front of it. It is not Photoshop. There is literally a hill here. No glass. No roof. Just dirt. Julian. You are high. Topher. Go sleep it off. I'll see you next week when we get back. I almost laughed. The denial was absolute. Julian could not process the information. His brain simply rejected the possibility that his glass castle could vanish. To him, the house was as permanent as his ego. He assumed his friend was messing with him, or that it was some sort of optical illusion. He was so arrogant, so sure of his place in the world, that he could not imagine a reality where I would dare to touch his sanctuary. He put the phone away. He did not ask me about it. He did not call the neighbors. He just dismissed reality because it did not fit his narrative. This was perfect. I wanted him to see it with his own eyes. I wanted the shock to be fresh, unfiltered, and visceral. An hour later, my own phone buzzed. It was Julian. Julian. Pick us up at the airport tomorrow. Flight 235. We land at 2 in the afternoon. No please, no hello, just a demand. Then a second message followed, dripping with misplaced aggression. Julian, and you better have a good explanation for what you did to the credit cards. You humiliated me in front of my friends. You humiliated your mother. We had to fly economy. Evelyn, economy. Do you have any idea how uncomfortable that is? We are exhausted. Have the car ready. I stared at the words, economy. He was worried about legroom while standing on the precipice of total ruin. He was worried about humiliation in a hotel lobby when he was about to face the humiliation of a lifetime. I typed my reply slowly, savoring every letter. I did not want to give anything away. I needed him to come to the site. I needed all of them there, the whole cast of characters for the final act. Evelyn. I will not be at the airport. I have meetings. The dots bubbled furiously. Julian. Are you kidding me? You stranded us in Greece and now you won't even pick us up. Fine. We will take an Uber, but you better be home when we get there. We need to talk. Now. Home. He was heading to 772 Skyline Drive. He was heading to the address that no longer held a house. I typed one final message. Evelyn. Okay. I will be waiting at the house. The old spot. I hit send. The old spot. It was a cruel double entendre. He thought I meant the living room, perhaps with a glass of wine. Ready to be scolded, I meant the land itself, the dirt, the coordinates. I locked the office door. I checked the file folders one last time to make sure everything was in order. I picked up my car keys and whistled for Barnaby. Come on, boy, I said. We have a show to catch. I drove to the penthouse, but I did not sleep well. I lay awake, watching the digital clock on the nightstand count down the hours. 4 a.m., 5 a.m., 6 a.m., the flight was in the air. They were crossing the Atlantic, hurtling toward me at 500 miles an hour. They were eating bad airline food, complaining about the cramped seats, and fueling their righteous indignation. They were rehearsing their speeches. My mother was probably planning how to guilt-trip me about the embarrassment I caused her. Caleb was probably coming up with a lie about why the loan sharks were calling. Julian was planning to threaten me with divorce if I ever cut off his funds again. They were flying toward a crater, and they thought they were landing on a runway. At noon the next day, I dressed for the occasion. I did not wear my construction gear. I did not wear the practical, muddy clothes Julian detested. I put on my boardroom armor, a black Armani suit, tailored to within an inch of its life, a silk blouse, red-bottomed heels that clicked sharply on the floor. I pulled my hair back into a severe, elegant chignon. I applied red lipstick a shade called Victory. I looked like the CEO of a company that moved mountains. I looked like a woman who signed checks and buried bodies. I drove to Skyline Drive at 1 in the afternoon. I parked my car across the street, in the shadow of an oak tree, just far enough away to be an observer. but close enough to be seen when the time was right. I rolled down the window. The air was cool and smelled of fresh grass. The hill looked magnificent in the afternoon sun. The bronze plaque glinted. I poured a cup of coffee from my thermos and waited. At 2:30, my phone alerted me that their flight had landed. At 3 o'clock, they would be clearing customs. At 3:30, they would be in the car. The street was quiet. Mrs. Gable was out watering her hydrangeas, casting suspicious glances at the park next door. Still unsure if she should be delighted or terrified, I checked my watch. 3:45. And then I saw them. A large black SUV turned the corner. Then another. They had taken Ubers, the expensive kind, probably charging it to an account they hoped was still working, or perhaps Julian had burned the last of his emergency cash. The cars slowed down as they approached the address. I saw the brake lights flare red. The quiet was over, the storm had arrived, and I was the lightning rod. The black Uber, a Chevrolet Suburban that had seen better days, slowed to a crawl as it navigated the familiar curve of Skyline Drive. Inside, the atmosphere was poisonous. I could not hear them from where I sat on top of the hill, but I did not need to. I knew the script by heart. My mother, Beatrice, was undoubtedly jammed into the middle seat. Her designer caftan wrinkled from the economy flight, complaining about the smell of the car. "This is unacceptable," she would be saying, her voice pitched high with indignation. "Evelyn didn't even send a town car. After everything I've done for her, she treats her own mother like a common tourist." Julian would be in the front seat, playing the role of the beleaguered patriarch. He would be texting on his phone, probably checking if his credit cards were miraculously working again while turning back to reassure Sienna. "Don't worry, babe, she's just throwing a tantrum. Once we get to the house, I'll straighten this out. I'll make her reactivate the accounts. She needs me. She always caves." Sienna, squeezed next to my brother Caleb in the back, would be silent, calculating. She was tired. She was broke, and the golden ticket she thought she had punched was starting to look a lot like a paper IOU. And Caleb was likely nursing a hangover and a terrifying fear of the loan sharks waiting for him, hoping that the family meeting would result in a cash infusion. I watched the car from my vantage point. I was sitting on a folding camping chair perched on the very apex of the grassy knoll. To any observer, I looked like a woman enjoying a particularly nice view of the city. In reality, I was sitting directly on top of the master bedroom skylight, separated from my old bed by 3 feet of concrete and 6 feet of compacted soil. I took a sip of iced tea. The condensation on the glass was cold against my fingers. The sun was warm on my face. It was a perfect day for a revelation. The Uber stopped. It did not pull into the driveway because there was no driveway. The concrete pavers had been ripped up and replaced with sod. The curb cut was still there, but it led only to a gentle, grassy slope. The driver, confused, double-checked his GPS. I saw him point at the screen, then at the empty lot. The passenger door opened. Julian stepped out first. He was wearing the same linen suit from the photo, but now it was rumpled and stained with travel fatigue. He shielded his eyes against the sun, looking for the towering glass structure that defined his self-worth. He froze. He blinked once, then twice. He took off his sunglasses and wiped them on his shirt, as if a smudge on the lens could erase an entire building. He put them back on. The building was still gone. "What the?" His voice drifted up to me, carried by the wind. It was small and thin. The back doors opened. Beatrice spilled out, clutching her duty-free bags. "Why have we stopped Julian? Tell him to pull into the garage. My feet are swelling." She looked up. Her mouth fell open. The complaint died in her throat, replaced by a sound that was half gasp, half shriek. "Where is it?" she yelled. She spun around, looking at the neighbor's house to the left, Mrs. Gable's hydrangea fortress, and the house to the right. The Petersons' Tudor mansion. They were exactly where they should be. "We are on the wrong street," Beatrice insisted, her voice rising to a panic. "Driver, you idiot! You brought us to a park. Take us to 772 Skyline Drive immediately. The driver leaned out his window, looking annoyed. Lady, this is 772. Check the mailbox. He pointed to the brushed steel mailbox at the curb. It was the only survivor. The numbers 772 were clearly visible, gleaming in the sunlight. Caleb and Sienna climbed out slowly, looking like survivors of a shipwreck washing up on a strange shore. They stood next to the pile of luggage on the sidewalk, Louis Vuitton suitcases that looked ridiculous against the backdrop of fresh grass. Julian, Sienna asked, her voice trembling. Where is the house? You said it was a mansion. Julian did not answer. He walked forward, stepping off the sidewalk and onto the grass. He looked down at his Gucci loafers sinking slightly into the soft earth. He looked up at the hill. He looked at the bronze plaque mounted on the stone. Greymont Memory Conservation Project. No, he whispered. No, no, no. He started to run. He charged up the slope, slipping on the fresh sod. He fell to his hands and knees, staining his expensive suit with green chlorophyll and brown dirt. He scrambled up again, frantic, like a man trying to claw his way out of a nightmare. Evelyn, he screamed. He saw me then. I was sitting calmly at the summit, legs crossed, sunglasses reflecting the blue sky. I put my tea down on the small portable table next to me. Julian reached the top, chest heaving, sweat dripping down his face. He looked wild. He looked nothing like the cool, collected creative director on the yacht. He looked like a desperate animal. Where is it? He choked out, spinning in a circle. He stomped his foot on the ground. Thud. It sounded solid. Where is my house? Where is my stuff? The rest of the family was struggling up the hill behind him. Beatrice was panting, clutching her chest. Caleb was helping Sienna, who was struggling in her platform sandals. They gathered around me, a circle of confusion and horror. Evelyn, my mother wheezed. What have you done? Is this a joke? Where is the house hidden? Hidden. I repeated the word, tasting it. I lowered my sunglasses and looked at them. It isn't hidden. Mother, you are standing on it. Julian stared at me, his eyes bulging. What do you mean, standing on it? I mean, I said, my voice conversational, as if explaining a new dinner recipe, that I filled the ground floor with 500 cubic yards of high-slump concrete. Then I collapsed the roof. Then I covered the entire structure with 5,000 tons of Class A structural fill dirt. It is all right here, under your feet. Silence. Absolute, terrified silence. The kind of silence that happens when the brain simply cannot process the magnitude of a disaster. Julian's voice cracked. You buried it. You said it was dead to you, I reminded him. I pulled my phone out and played the audio from the text message I had converted to speech just for this moment. Once it is old, it is dead to me. The robotic voice cut through the air. I took you literally. Julian, I said. Dead things get buried. It seemed like the respectful thing to do. My computer, Julian whispered, the color draining from his face. My servers, my collection, my hard drives. All down there, I said, tapping the grass with the heel of my shoe. Probably encased in concrete by now, or crushed under the weight of the dirt. Hard to say. Physics is a harsh mistress. You crazy bitch! He lunged at me. I did not flinch. I did not move. I just looked at him. And he stopped. He stopped because he saw something in my eyes that he had never seen before. He saw the cold, hard resolve of a woman who had moved millions of tons of earth for a living. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that he was physically threatening a woman who commanded fleets of bulldozers. He backed away, his hands shaking. That's illegal. You destroyed my property. I'll sue you. I'll have you arrested. Property. I laughed. It was a sharp, jagged sound. Julian, honey, you don't own any property. You signed a prenup, and you signed a quitclaim deed. Remember? Oh, wait, you forged the quitclaim deed. We'll get to that. My clothes, Beatrice wailed. I left my winter furs in the guest closet, my jewelry box. Buried, I said to her. Consider it a time capsule. Mom, maybe in 1,000 years, archaeologists will dig it up and wonder why a woman who claimed to love her daughter spent so much time stealing from her. Beatrice gasped, clutching her pearls. How dare you, I am your mother. And I am the bank, I said coldly. And the bank is closed, permanently. Caleb stepped forward, trying to play the peacemaker, or perhaps realizing that his loan sharks were going to be very disappointed with a pile of dirt. Evie, look, let's calm down. This is extreme, but we can fix this. We can dig it out. We can dig it out. I looked at him with pity. Caleb, that is 5,000 tons of compacted soil, and below that is a solid block of concrete. You couldn't dig this out with a teaspoon. You would need industrial blasting equipment, and since I own the land, and I own the permit, nobody is digging anything. Sienna started to cry. It was a soft, hopeless sound. She looked at Julian, then at the hill, then at me. You said you were rich, she sobbed, turning to Julian. You said we would sell the house. You said we would have $2 million. He lied, I said helpfully. He lies a lot. He told you he owned my patents, too. Didn't he hydrolock soil stabilization? Yeah. He can't even change a tire. Julian turned on Sienna. Shut up. Don't listen to her. She knows. Julian. Sienna screamed. She knows everything. Look at this. It's gone. The money is gone. The money was never there, I corrected. The money was mine. The house was mine. The car you took to the airport, mine. The credit card you used to buy that ugly skirt, mine. I stood up from my chair. I was wearing heels, but I balanced perfectly on the grass. I towered over them, not in height, but in presence. You thought I was just the infrastructure, I said, looking at each of them in turn. You thought I was the boring foundation that you could build your pretty little lives on top of. You thought you could chip away at me, take pieces of me, and I would just stay there, holding you up. I took a step toward Julian. He flinched. Well, congratulations, I said. You were right. I am the foundation, and I just decided to recall the support beams. Where are we supposed to sleep? Beatrice whispered, looking around the empty lot with wide, frightened eyes. We have nowhere to go. I hear the Motel 6 on the highway has vacancies, I said. They take cash. Oh, wait, you spent all your cash on the flight change, didn't you? Evelyn, please, Julian begged. He dropped to his knees in the dirt. It was pathetic. Please, I'm sorry. It was a mistake. We can work this out. Just tell me this is a joke. Tell me the house is just covered up. Tell me my things are safe. Your things are safe, I said. They are safer than they have ever been. They are preserved in a tomb of your own making. I picked up my tea and folded my chair. Now, if you will excuse me, I said, stepping around Julian as if he were a piece of litter. I have a meeting with my lawyer. She is very excited to meet you. Julian, she has a stack of papers for you to sign. Divorce papers. Fraud affidavits, you know, the boring paperwork. You can't leave us here, Caleb yelled. I am not leaving you anywhere, I said, walking down the hill toward my car. This is public property now, or at least a private park open to the public. You are welcome to stay as long as you like. Just don't pitch a tent. The Homeowners Association has strict rules about camping. I reached my car and opened the door. I looked back one last time. They were standing on the hill, a cluster of broken, selfish people stranded on an island of green in a sea of suburbia. Julian was weeping into the grass. Sienna was screaming into her phone. Beatrice was yelling at Caleb. It was the most beautiful landscape I had ever designed. Welcome home, I whispered, and then I drove away. The sound of fingernails scraping against compacted soil is a sound I will never forget. It is desperate, animalistic, and pathetic. Julian was on his hands and knees, clawing at the earth like a terrier trying to dig out a badger. His linen suit, once a symbol of his leisurely existence, was now stained dark with mud and grass stains. He dug with a manic intensity, flinging clods of red clay over his shoulder, panting with a mixture of exertion and sheer terror. "It has to be here," he gibbered, his voice high and thin. "It is just dirt. It is just dirt. I can reach the window. I can break the glass." He dug down perhaps 6 inches before his fingers hit something hard. It was not glass. It was not wood. It was the jagged, unforgiving surface of the concrete cap I had poured over the first floor. He struck it again. Thud. He struck it a third time, harder, crying out as the impact likely broke a fingernail. "No!" he screamed, slamming his fists against the ground. "No, my collection, my Patek, my server." He looked up at me, his face streaked with sweat and dirt. "Evelyn, my server is down there. Do you know what is on that drive? I have client files I have personal data that is irreplaceable. I knew exactly what was on that server. I had seen the encrypted folders labeled leverage and private when I did my sweep. I did not know the specific contents, but judging by his panic, it was likely the kind of black data that could ruin a reputation or land someone in jail. "It is irreplaceable," I agreed, standing over him like a monolith. "That is why I encased it in concrete. It is safe forever. Julian, nobody will ever see it. You should be thanking me for the security upgrade." He stared at me with pure hatred. "I will sue you," he spat. "I will take everything. I will own your company by the time I am done. You destroyed my property." I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick blue folder. I did not hand it to him. I dropped it. It landed with a heavy slap in the dirt right next to his ruined knees. "Read it," I said. "That is the property classification update for the site you are currently trespassing on. As of 3 days ago, this location was redesignated as a geological storage facility for apex terraforming. The structure beneath us was decommissioned as a residential unit and repurposed as structural fill. It is a corporate asset, Julian, and since you do not own a single share of Apex and you signed away all claims to corporate property in the prenuptial agreement, you have no standing." "I lived here," he shouted, scrambling to his feet. "I have rights, squatter's rights, tenant rights." "You were a guest," I corrected him. "A guest who overstayed his welcome, and guests do not get to dictate how the host renovates the guest room." Before he could respond, a sleek silver Mercedes pulled up to the curb behind the black Uber. The door opened, and Harper Stein stepped out. She looked immaculate in a sharp navy power suit, holding a leather briefcase like a weapon. She walked up the grassy slope, her heels sinking slightly, but her stride never faltering. She looked at the muddy, pathetic group assembled on my hill and smiled a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Good afternoon," Harper said. Her voice was crisp, cutting through the humid afternoon air. "I am Harper Stein, legal counsel for Ms. Graymont." She stopped in front of Julian and extended a hand, not to shake, but to serve. "Julian Vance," she said. "You are hereby served." She slapped a thick packet of documents against his chest. He fumbled to catch them, his muddy hands smearing the pristine white paper. "Petition for dissolution of marriage," Harper recited, ticking off the points on her fingers. "Filed on grounds of adultery, abandonment, and egregious financial misconduct. We are also filing a separate civil suit for attempted fraud regarding the forged quitclaim deed you emailed to your broker." Julian went pale beneath the dirt. I didn't." "We have the IP logs." "Mr. Vance," Harper interrupted. "We have the metadata. We have the email thread where you explicitly discussed forging my client's signature. It is a felony. We are being generous by keeping it in civil court for now. But that can change if you decide to be difficult." Sienna, who had been standing silently by the luggage, suddenly stepped forward. Her face was a mask of confusion and dawning horror. She looked at the papers in Julian's hands, then at Harper, then at me. "Wait," Sienna said, her voice trembling. "What do you mean, He doesn't own shares. What do you mean he forged the deed? I turned to her. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. He told you he owned the company, didn't he? I asked softly. He told you he was the silent genius behind Apex. He told you that he invented the hydro-lock system and that I was just the face of the operation. Sienna's eyes widened. He showed me the patent filings. They had his name on them. He showed you Photoshop, I said. Sienna, look at him. Look at his hands. Do those look like the hands of an engineer? Julian thinks tensile strength is a brand of hair gel. He has never stepped foot in my lab. He has never read a geological survey. He is a creative director for a company that does not exist. Sienna spun around to face Julian. You lied to me, she shrieked. You said we would have millions. You said the royalties alone were worth $5 million a year. Babe, listen, Julian stammered, backing away from her. It is complicated. The legal structure is… I was going to explain. He is broke, Sienna, I said, driving the knife in. He is not just broke, he is destitute. The credit cards he uses, they are mine. Supplementary cards on my account. The car he drives. Company lease. The clothes on his back. I paid for them. He does not even own the underwear he's wearing right now. I bought a 3-pack of those boxers at Macy's last Christmas. Check the label. Sienna stared at him, her mouth working silently. The realization washed over her face like a tidal wave. The debt she was hoping to pay off. The luxury life she was banking on. The future she had sold her integrity for it was all smoke. She had slept with a pauper in a prince's suit. You fraud, she screamed. You loser, I paid for dinner last night with my last 300 euros. You said you would wire me the money. I will, Julian pleaded. I just need to access the account that does not exist, I asked. Good luck with that. My mother, Beatrice, decided that this was the moment to intervene. She stepped forward, clutching her duty-free bags to her chest, her face twisted into a mask of righteous indignation. She ignored the facts. She ignored the law. She went for the emotional jugular, just as she always did. Evelyn, she boomed, using her mother voice that used to make me cower when I was a child. Stop this immediately. Look at what you are doing. You are destroying this family over money over a house. Have you lost your mind? She gestured to the group, the cheater, the mistress, the gambler. These are your people, Evelyn. We are your blood. How can you be so cold? How can you leave us on the street like this, after everything I sacrificed for you? Sacrificed, I repeated. You mean the sacrifice of spending my money on a first-class vacation to celebrate my husband cheating on me? I went to support him, Beatrice lied, tears springing to her eyes on command. He was hurting. He needed family. I was trying to mediate. Mediate, I said flatly. Is that what you call it? I pulled out my phone again. Harper, play Exhibit C, please. Harper tapped her tablet. A voice filled the air, amplified by the Bluetooth speaker she had pulled from her briefcase. It was clear, crisp, and undeniably Beatrice. She is such a bore, Julian. Honestly, I don't know how you put up with her for 12 years. All she talks about is dirt and contracts. You deserve someone with a spark. Someone like Sienna. Evelyn has always been dreary. Just keep her happy until the patent checks clear. Then you can take half, and we can finally live properly. The recording ended. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a lung. Beatrice went white. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked at Julian, who was too busy being screamed at by Sienna to help her. She looked at Caleb, who was staring at his shoes. That was taken out of context, Beatrice whispered, her voice shaking. It was taken from a voicemail you left Julian 3 weeks ago, I said. You thought I never checked his phone. You were wrong. I took a step closer to her. You called me dreary. You called me a cash cow. You encouraged him to use me until the money cleared. Well, Mother, the cow has stopped giving milk. I am cutting you off. The allowance gone. The retirement fund. You already drained that, so I don't need to cancel it. The apartment I pay for in the city, the lease is in my name. I canceled it this morning. You have 30 days to vacate." "You can't do that," Beatrice shrieked. "I am an old woman. I have nowhere to go." "You have your son," I said, pointing at Caleb. "Your golden boy, the one you always said was so much smarter than me. The one who was going to be a crypto-billionaire." Caleb flinched as the spotlight turned to him. He had been trying to make himself invisible behind the pile of luggage. "Speaking of Caleb," I said, turning my gaze to my brother. "Harper, did you file the police report?" "Filed and stamped at 9 this morning," Harper confirmed cheerfully. "Police report?" Caleb's voice squeaked. "For what?" "Identity theft, wire fraud, and grand larceny." I listed them off casually. "I found the loans. Caleb, the ones from Quick Capital Solutions. The ones where you used my social security number and forged my signature to borrow $150,000. Caleb's knees actually knocked together. "Evie, no. I was going to pay it back. It was a sure thing. The market just corrected." "I don't care about the market," I said. "I care about my credit score. I reported the fraud. The police are looking for you. And those loan sharks. When they realize the guarantor me is not paying, who do you think they are going to come looking for?" Caleb looked like he was about to vomit. You called the cops on your own brother. You stole my identity," I said. "That makes you a criminal, not a brother." I looked at the four of them. They were unraveling. The glue that held them together, my money, was gone. And without it, they were just a collection of greedy, frightened narcissists turning on each other. "You ruined everything!" Sienna screamed at Julian, suddenly lunging at him. She slapped him across the face, a sharp crack that echoed down the street. "You liar! You wasted my time! You owe me 6 months of my life!" Julian stumbled back, holding his cheek. "Sienna, stop. You are making a scene." "I am making a scene," she shrieked, hitting him again with her purse. "You made me homeless." Beatrice turned on Caleb. The fear of being destitute had stripped away her maternal mask. "You idiot!" she yelled, slapping him on the arm. "You said you had money. You said you were handling the finances. You told me to spend the trust fund because you would triple it with your investments." "I tried, Mom," Caleb yelled back, pushing her hand away. "It's not my fault. Evelyn is the one being a bitch." "Don't you dare blame your sister," Beatrice shouted, suddenly changing her tune now that she realized I was the only one with resources. But it was too late. The desperation made her clumsy. "You dragged me into this. You told me Julian was going to win. You gambled away my security." She slapped him again, harder this time, across the face. It was chaos, a brawl of accusations and violence on the side of the road. Sienna was clawing at Julian's suit. Julian was trying to shield his face. Beatrice was hitting Caleb. Caleb was trying to run away but tripped over a Louis Vuitton bag. I stood on the hill, watching them. It was Shakespearean. It was tragic. It was hilarious. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, raising my voice over the din. "Please, save your energy. You have a long walk ahead of you." They stopped, panting, looking up at me. "The Uber driver left 5 minutes ago," I pointed out. "And since none of your cards work, I doubt you can call another one." I checked my watch. "I have a dinner reservation at a place that does not serve betrayal on the menu. Harper, are we done here?" "We are done," Harper said, snapping her briefcase shut. "Wait," Julian cried out, blood trickling from a scratch on his cheek where Sienna had nailed him. "Evelyn, the house, is it really? Is there really concrete?" He still couldn't believe it. He was still holding on to the hope that this was a trick, that his toys were just hidden in a closet somewhere. "Go buy a shovel and find out," I said, "but do it off my property. If I see you on this grass again, I will have you arrested for trespassing." I turned my back on them. I walked down the other side of the slope toward my car. Behind me, the sounds of their implosions started up again, sobbing, shouting, the dragging of heavy suitcases on pavement. I got into my car. Harper got into hers. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror. They were still there. A cluster of ants on a hill, fighting over crumbs that didn't exist. The house was gone. The money was gone. And finally, for the first time in 12 years, the weight on my shoulders was gone too. Julian stood there, his chest heaving, his face a mask of mud and blood where Sienna's fingernails had connected. He looked at the retreating bumper of my car, then back at the hill, and suddenly, a desperate, litigious light ignited in his eyes. He realized that emotional appeals would not work. He realized that threats of physical violence were futile against a woman who commanded heavy machinery. So he reached for the weapon of the coward, the lawsuit. "You can't leave," he screamed, his voice cracking. "This isn't over. Evelyn, you destroyed marital property, the contents of that house, the furniture, the electronics, the art. That wasn't corporate property, that was personal property. Half of that belongs to me." I stopped the car. I put it in park. I wasn't running away. I was just repositioning for the final strike. I opened the door and stepped back out onto the pavement. Harper Stein, who had been about to drive off, paused and rolled down her window, raising an eyebrow. I signaled for her to join me. This was the part she enjoyed the most. I walked back toward the group. They were huddled together like survivors of a shipwreck, shivering despite the afternoon sun. "You are right, Julian," I said, my voice carrying clearly over the gentle rustle of the weeping willow trees I had planted on top of his gaming room. The house structure belonged to Apex Terraforming, but the contents, the sofas, the TVs, your sneaker collection, those were technically personal property acquired during the marriage. "Aha," Julian pointed a shaking finger at me. "I knew it. You admitted it. That stuff was worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. You destroyed it without my consent. That is malicious destruction of property. I will sue you for the full replacement value. I will drag you through court until you are bankrupt." He looked at Sienna and his mother, seeking validation. "See, I told you. She slipped up. She owes me. We are going to get paid." I looked at Harper. Harper smiled, reached into her briefcase, and pulled out a sleek, black USB drive and a single sheet of paper. "Actually," I said, taking the drive from Harper, "I didn't destroy anything. Destruction implies that the items are ruined, lost, or rendered uniform. I didn't do that. I preserved them." "Preserved?" Julian looked at the hill. "You buried them under dirt. That is destruction." "No," I corrected him. "That is art." I held up the USB drive. 2 days ago, before the first concrete truck arrived, I hired a licensed independent appraiser and a videographer to document the entire interior of the house, every room, every item, every shoe. We cataloged it all. Then, I had the site legally redesignated as a contemporary art installation titled "The Burden of Materialism." Julian blinked. "What?" "It is an art project, Julian," I explained, stepping closer. "The concept is simple. We took a fully furnished modern home, a symbol of capitalist excess, and encased it in concrete and earth to represent the suffocating weight of greed. It is very avant-garde. The appraiser valued the installation itself, the land, plus the artistic concept at $5.2 million. That is actually $1 million more than the house was worth when it was just a house." I paused to let that sink in. "So, technically," I continued, "I didn't destroy the value of the estate. I increased it. As the CEO of the company that owns the land, I made a fiduciary decision to maximize the asset's value. You can't sue me for making us richer." "But I can't use my stuff," Julian sputtered. "My watch, my computer. I can't get to them." "That is the point of the art," I said deadpan. "It speaks to the inaccessibility of the past. It is very deep. You wouldn't understand. You are just a creative director." "This is bullshit," Julian screamed. "I want my money. I want the value of the stuff inside." "Fine," I said. "Let's talk about the value of the stuff inside." I took the sheet of paper from Harper. "This is the official appraisal of the household goods. Used furniture, depreciation applied. Used electronics, depreciation applied. Your sneaker collection. The appraiser noted that most of them were worn and had no box. significantly lowering the resale value. I pulled a checkbook from my purse. I uncapped a fountain pen. The total appraised value of the contents, the furniture, the clothes, the gadgets came to exactly $10,000. Most of it was IKEA and depreciated tech. Julian, we didn't own any real art because you spent all our money on vacations. I wrote out a check. My handwriting was smooth and steady. Since we are in a community property state for personal goods, you are entitled to 50% of the value, I said. I ripped the check out of the book and flicked it toward him. It fluttered in the breeze and landed in the dirt at his feet. $5,000, I said. That is your half. I have bought you out. The contents of the hill now belong solely to me as the artist. If you want your sneakers back, you are welcome to apply for an excavation permit. But I will warn you, I will deny it on the grounds that it compromises the artistic integrity of the piece. Julian stared at the check lying in the mud. $5,000. That was it. That was the sum total of his 12-year marriage. That was the millions he had promised Sienna. 5,000, Sienna screeched. She looked at the check, then at Julian. You said the watch alone was worth 50 grand. He lied, I said. I bought that watch on Canal Street in New York for $200. It is a replica, a very good one, but a fake, just like him. Julian's face went purple. You told me it was real. And you told me you loved me. I shrugged. I guess we both lied about the value of things. Before Julian could explode, the sound of sirens cut through the air. But this wasn't the polite whoop-whoop of a traffic cop. This was the aggressive yelp of a cruiser arriving with purpose. 2 police cars pulled up to the curb, boxing in the Uber that had long since departed. Caleb, who had been trying to hide behind his mother, suddenly turned the color of the concrete buried beneath us. Officers, Beatrice yelled, waving her arms. Thank God, arrest her. She buried our house. She stole our property. The officers ignored Beatrice. They ignored the hill. They walked straight toward the group, their hands resting on their belts. One of them, a sergeant with a thick neck and zero patience, pulled out a photo. He looked at the photo, then at my brother. Caleb Graymont, the sergeant asked. Caleb made a noise that sounded like a dying mouse. You are under arrest, the sergeant said, pulling out handcuffs. For what? Beatrice screamed, throwing herself between Caleb and the officer. He hasn't done anything. He is a victim. Ma'am, step aside, the officer said, moving her firmly out of the way. Caleb Graymont, you are under arrest for identity theft, wire fraud, and 4 counts of grand larceny. We have a warrant issued based on evidence provided by the Fraud Division of Quick Capital Solutions and a complaint filed by Ms. Evelyn Graymont. Evelyn, Beatrice shrieked, turning to me with eyes full of betrayal. You called the police on your own brother. He stole my identity, mother, I said calmly. He took out $150,000 in loans in my name. That is a felony. I am not going to let him ruin my credit score just because we share DNA. The officers spun Caleb around. Click, click. The sound of the handcuffs locking was louder than any shout. Mom, do something, Caleb wailed as they marched him toward the squad car. Call a lawyer. Pay the bail. I can't, Beatrice sobbed. I don't have any money. Don't worry, Caleb, I called out. I hear prison has a great gym. You can finally work on that physique you are always bragging about. They shoved him into the back of the cruiser. The door slammed shut. Now it was just the 3 of them. Julian, Sienna, and Beatrice. Sienna looked at the police car, then at the check in the mud, then at Julian. The math finally clicked in her head. There was no patent money. There was no house money. There was only $5,000 and a potential fraud lawsuit. She pulled out her phone. She didn't call a lawyer. She opened the Uber app. Sienna. Julian reached for her arm. Babe, don't leave. We can fix this. We can take the $5,000 and get a hotel room. We can figure something out. Sienna slapped his hand away. Don't touch me, she hissed. You are a loser. Julian, a broke, lying, Pathetic loser. I am not going to a Motel 6 with you. But I love you, Julian cried. I love the lifestyle, Sienna corrected him brutally. And clearly, the lifestyle is over. A black sedan pulled up a minute later. Sienna got in without looking back. She didn't even say goodbye. She just slammed the door and drove off, leaving Julian standing in the dirt with nothing but a fake watch and a stained suit. Then, a white security truck rolled up. It was the neighborhood patrol. The homeowners association took their job very seriously. The guard, a man named Ralph, who I sent a Christmas basket to every year, stepped out. He looked at me, then at the dirty, screaming people on my lawn. Ms. Graymont, Ralph said, tipping his cap. Everything okay here? We got reports of a disturbance. Vagrants on the property. Vagrants, I agreed, nodding. Yes, Ralph, these people are trespassing. They are shouting and disturbing the peace. I would like them removed from the premises. But I live here, Julian shouted. I am her husband. Ex-husband pending, I said. And you don't live here. Nobody lives here. This is a park, and the park is closed to trash. As Ralph stepped forward, his hand on his baton. Sir, I am going to have to ask you to leave the private property. The residents have complained about the noise. I am a resident, Julian screamed. Not anymore, Ralph said. You are not on the list. Move along, or I call the real cops back. Julian looked at the police car where Caleb was still crying in the back seat. He looked at Ralph. He looked at me. He realized he was outnumbered, outgunned, and outsmarted. He bent down and picked up the check for $5,000. His hand was shaking. He wiped the mud off it on his pants. It was the ultimate surrender. He started walking. He didn't look back. He just walked down the street, past the manicured lawns of the neighbors he used to try to impress, a lonely figure in a ruined suit, carrying nothing but a piece of paper that represented the total sum of his failure. That left Beatrice. My mother stood on the sidewalk, surrounded by her luggage. She looked small. The bravado was gone. The anger was gone. All that was left was the terrifying realization of her own reality. Evelyn, she whispered. Her voice was trembling. Evelyn, please, where am I supposed to go? I don't know. Mother, I said, checking my nails. You are a resourceful woman. You managed to drain a trust fund in 2 weeks. I am sure you can figure out how to rent a room. But I have no money left, she sobbed. I spent it all on the trip, and, she paused, looking down at her feet. And what? I asked. And I sold the cottage, she confessed. The words came out in a rush. I sold the house in Ohio, last month, before the trip. I stared at her. You sold your house. Why, to give the money to Caleb, she wailed. He said he needed capital. He said he would double it in a month. I gave him everything. Evelyn, $180,000. I have nothing. I am homeless. I looked at the police car where Caleb sat. The money was gone, burned in a crypto crash or seized by loan sharks. My mother had liquidated her only asset to fund the favorite child. And now she was standing on my curb, expecting the scapegoat to save her. You sold your house, I repeated slowly, to give money to the boy who just stole my identity. And now you want to live with me. I am your mother, she cried, reaching out to grab my hand. You can't let me sleep on the street. I am family. I pulled my hand away as if she were contagious. Family, I said, is the people who don't steal from you. Family is the people who don't call you dreary behind your back. You made your choice. Beatrice, you bet on Caleb. You lost. Evelyn, please. She fell to her knees. It was a dramatic gesture, one she had used 1,000 times to get her way. I will be good. I will cook. I will clean. Just let me stay in the penthouse. I know you have a penthouse. I heard you tell the lawyer. The penthouse is for people who were invited, I said. You were not invited. I pointed down the road, toward the highway overpass visible in the distance. There is a shelter on 4th Street, I said. They take people in after 6, or you can use the $5,000 Julian has. Maybe he will share. After all, you supported him so much. He won't share, she sobbed. He is selfish. Yes, I said. He is. Strange how you never noticed that until you needed his money. I got back into my car. Harper was already in hers, engine running. Evelyn, Beatrice screamed, scrambling up and banging on my window. You can't do this. I gave you life. I rolled down the window 1 inch. And I am giving you a life lesson, I said. Don't bite the hand that feeds you, and definitely don't try to bury the person who holds the shovel. I rolled the window up. I put the car in drive. I drove away, leaving my mother standing on the curb with her Louis Vuitton bags, screaming at a bronze plaque that marked the grave of the life she had helped destroy. The police car pulled out behind me, taking Caleb to jail. Julian was a speck in the distance, walking toward oblivion. The final nail had been driven. The coffin was closed, and I had never felt more alive. 6 months is a long time in the world of construction, but it is an eternity in the world of healing. Spring had arrived in Seattle, bringing with it the pale, determined sunlight that breaks through the gray cloud cover like a promise. I stood at the base of the winding road that used to lead to a glass prison, but now, the address 772 Skyline Drive led to something entirely different. The locals called it Graymont Hill. It had become something of an urban legend, a pilgrimage site for architecture students, environmentalists, and curious tourists who had heard the whispers of the buried mansion. The city, initially confused by my emergency permits, had eventually embraced the project as a revolutionary piece of green infrastructure. The zoning board had even awarded me a commendation for innovative urban regreening. I watched a young couple spread a picnic blanket near the spot where my kitchen island used to be. They were laughing, eating sandwiches, completely unaware that 20 feet beneath them lay a sub-zero refrigerator and a set of custom cabinets that had cost more than their car. To them, it was just a beautiful rolling meadow in the middle of a concrete city. To me, it was the most expensive graveyard in the state of Washington. My company, Apex Terraforming, had exploded in the wake of the project. The audacity of it, the sheer, brutal elegance of burying a structure rather than demolishing it, had caught the eye of developers who were tired of the same old glass and steel boxes. I was currently overseeing 3 new projects in Oregon and a massive coastal stabilization contract in California. We were billing 30% above our previous rates, and we had a waiting list for consultations. Success, it turned out, was the best revenge. But peace was a close second. I walked up the path, the crushed gravel crunching softly under my boots. I wasn't wearing my high heels today. I was wearing jeans and a soft cashmere sweater, clothes that felt like a hug rather than armor. Barnaby trotted beside me, his tail wagging as he sniffed the wildflowers that had bloomed on the south slope. He looked younger, sprier. The tension that used to radiate from me in that house had affected him too. And now that it was gone, he was just a happy, old dog enjoying the sun. I reached the summit. The view was still spectacular. The city skyline glittered in the distance, the Space Needle piercing the clouds. But I didn't care about the city. I cared about the ground beneath my feet. I had come here today for a specific purpose. Mike Sledgehammer Kowalski was waiting for me. He stood next to a hole he had dug, a small, precise hole, nothing like the massive trenches of 6 months ago. Beside him lay a burlap-wrapped root ball, the base of a young, sturdy white oak tree. "Morning, boss," Mike said, tipping his hard hat. He looked at the hill with a proprietary pride. "Grass is coming in thick. The drainage system is holding up perfectly. No settling." "It looks beautiful." "Mike," I said, "thank you for meeting me here." "I figured you would want to do this part yourself," he said, gesturing to the tree. "I do." We lowered the oak into the ground. I grabbed a shovel and began to fill in the dirt. This was not the frantic, destructive burial of the house. This was a planting. This was an act of creation. I patted the soil down around the trunk, The tree stood directly over what used to be the master bedroom. Its roots would grow deep. They would wind their way down through the soil, eventually hitting the concrete sarcophagus below. They would wrap around the tomb of my marriage, feeding on the nutrients of the earth, turning the decay of the past into strong branches and fresh leaves. "Grow strong," I whispered to the bark. "Take everything that was rotten down there and turn it into oxygen." Mike handed me a bottle of water. We stood in silence for a moment, watching the wind rustle the new leaves. "You hear about him?" Mike asked quietly. He didn't need to say the name. "I heard," I said. Julian was not dead, but the version of him that I had married, the arrogant, wealthy, creative director, was gone. Harper Stein, my shark of a lawyer, had been thorough. The defamation countersuit we filed after he went on a podcast to call me a psycho bulldozer witch had been the final nail in his coffin. We won. We won everything. Julian was currently living in a 300-square-foot studio apartment in a basement in Renton, about 20 miles south of the city. He was working at a shoe store in the mall, a delicious irony that Harper and I had laughed about over drinks. The man who used to collect $40,000 sneakers was now kneeling on the floor fitting teenagers for school shoes. His wages were garnished to pay my legal fees. Every month, I received a check for $312 from the state. It was a pittance compared to what he owed, but I framed the first one. It hung in my office as a reminder that justice, while slow, is absolute. Sienna had vanished. Rumor had it she had moved back to Ohio to live with her parents. Her influencer dreams crushed under the weight of debt and public humiliation. As for my family, I walked over to the stone bench I had installed near the plaque. I sat down, feeling the warmth of the stone. I hadn't spoken to Beatrice or Caleb in 6 months. Not a word, not a text. Beatrice had tried to reach out in the beginning. She sent letters, long, rambling screeds that oscillated between begging for money and cursing my name. I burned them unopened. I heard from a distant cousin that she was living in a state-subsidized senior housing facility. It was clean, safe, and boring, exactly what she deserved. Caleb was currently serving 18 months of probation and completing 500 hours of community service. He was also working double shifts at a warehouse to pay back the loan sharks, who were far less forgiving than I was. Cutting them off had felt like amputating a limb, painful, bloody, and terrifying. But once the wound healed, I realized that the limb had been gangrenous. Without the constant drain of their needs, their criticisms, and their greed, I felt lighter. I had energy. I had space in my head for my own thoughts. I had found a new family. It wasn't a family of blood. It was a family of choice. It was Harper, who invited me to pass over dinner and introduced me to her wife. It was Mike, who taught me how to fish on weekends. It was the young engineers at my company, whom I mentored with the patience and generosity that my mother had never shown me. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of damp earth and new grass. My phone buzzed in my pocket. For years, that sound had triggered a Pavlovian response of anxiety. A buzz meant a demand. A buzz meant Julian needed money, or Beatrice was complaining, or a crisis was unfolding. But now I pulled the phone out. It was a text from David. David was an architect I had met at a symposium last month. He was 45, with laugh lines around his eyes and hands that were rough from working with wood. He didn't care about my money. He ran a small firm that specialized in sustainable housing for low-income communities. He drove a 10-year-old truck and read actual books, made of paper. "David, I found that vintage bookstore you were talking about. You were right. The architecture section is incredible. I picked up a first edition on Frank Lloyd Wright for you. Dinner tonight to celebrate. I know a place that serves terrible wine but amazing pasta." I stared at the screen. A smile touched my lips. A real smile. One that reached my eyes. 6 months ago, I would have analyzed this text for hidden agendas. I would have wondered what he wanted from me. I would have worried that I was too old, too dreary, too much of a workhorse to be interesting. But the woman who worried about those things was buried under 5,000 tons of dirt. She was down there in the dark with the shattered skylights and the fake Patek Philippe watch. The woman sitting on the bench was new. She was built on a foundation of iron will and self-respect, She was the CEO of her own life. I typed a reply. Evelyn, terrible wine sounds perfect. 7 o'clock, I hit send. I stood up and brushed the pollen from my jeans. I called for Barnaby. Come on, boy. Let's go home. We walked down the hill together, leaving the oak tree to stand guard over the past. I climbed into my car, a new one, a sleek electric SUV that I had bought just because I liked the color, and started the engine. As I pulled away from the curb, I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. The sun was setting behind Greymont Hill, casting long shadows across the emerald grass. It didn't look like a scar anymore. It looked like a monument. It was a testament to the fact that you can bury the things that hurt you, and if you are patient enough and strong enough, you can grow a garden on top of them. I didn't turn back. I merged onto the main road, heading toward the city, toward the pasta, toward David, and toward a future that was entirely, wonderfully mine. The rearview mirror showed only the road ahead. Thank you so much for listening to this story of betrayal, revenge, and ultimate rebirth. It has been a journey, hasn't it? I would love to know where you are listening from right now. Are you in a bustling city like Seattle, or somewhere quiet and remote? Drop a comment below and let's get a conversation started. I read every single one, and if you enjoyed watching Evelyn bury her past to build her future, please make sure to subscribe to the Scarlet Revenge Stories channel. Smash that like button, and hit the hype button to help this story reach even more people who might need a reminder of their own strength. Until next time, stay strong and never let anyone treat you like an option when you are a priority.